Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for bearing with me. Welcome to the workshop. So, is gaining control over procrastination and motivation. We're going to go over some basics of the concepts of motivation, how procrastination is related to it, and some ways to think about it different and to change some habits around them. Okay, Samena is going to get us started. Whoops.
Okay. So I'm Ximena Rajanovic, and I'm a doctoral psychology intern at CAPS UNLV. And I'm really glad to be here today to talk to you about motivation. So I will start with some background on motivation, see what means. Motivation is the lead for all human behavior. So everything we do, no matter of the activity we do, it's led by our motivation. So motivation gives us a reason to take action, fulfill our needs, our goals, and then represents the drive to start something, to act on something, and to maintain goal-oriented behaviors, like intentional behaviors. Okay, go to the next.
Working on
it. Okay. Okay, so there are more types of motivation. So we'll see how these different types of motivation could be beneficial or not so beneficial to us. So we have the positive motivation, which means that our activities or behaviors are led by our internal satisfaction in relation to a specific task. So we have resources to complete a challenging task without, when we talk about positive motivation, we count on our internal resources to accomplish something without being influenced or expecting external encouragement. So in this way, we are motivated by the task itself. And the completion of the respective task satisfy us. So, for example, when we study, we are studying for the pleasure of learning, to achieve more knowledge, rather than just thinking about the outcomes of our learning, what other people would say, or how we would be evaluated on our learning experience. Negative motivation, it's based on external factors. For example, we can study something or do a specific behavior because we are afraid of failure. So we want to do this because otherwise we would fail. So in accomplishing a difficult test, we need external encouragement, if we go by negative motivation, or reassurance from other people, or we do a specific behavior because we want to escape certain tasks that they are pressuring us, or they are stressful to us. But in either way, we have to remember that no matter what type of motivation we use, motivation is the reason for our behavior. No behavior is done with no motivation at all. Okay. So now we go a little bit deeper in the concept of motivation, and we'll talk about intrinsically motivated behaviors, which means that we are internally motivated. So when we engage in an activity, we do it because we have passion, or because we are dedicated to a specific cause or a specific task. And so, we do not expect a reward from outside, from other people. The reward that we receive by doing this a specific activity is related to the activity itself. So, for example, we attach meaning to something, and we want to do that because it gives us internal satisfaction. It's not because our people evaluate us negative or positive. And then intrinsically motivated behaviors we have like So now versus extrinsically motivated behaviors, we'll see when we engage in an activity to obtain an outcome, that means the activity in itself is not, the activities or the behavior that we are doing is not related to the respective activity. We expect rewards. We are worried about consequences that are separable from the activity itself. So let's say that we study for an exam. So usually it's more productive and we remember more information when we are into that learning experience, when we are interested in the information that we're studying, while when we study for the grades or for the outcomes or for not failing a class, our learning experience becomes more stressful because we are thinking about factors that are not so much in our control. So in our control is the activity itself, how we organize our studying, what information we want to learn, what may be useful to us, what can we use, to manage processes in the future, having that knowledge. So I just want to kind of make it to emphasize that when we are internally motivated, we are doing that it's the behavior is related with the activity itself, and we are internally motivated. When we are doing extrinsically motivated behaviors, we are expecting external encouragements or external reassurance, and it's not related to the activity in itself. We can go to the next slide. All right, so now we talk a little bit about the quality of students' motivation. What was the learning intrinsically motivated? This is a question for all of us. We can evaluate ourselves when we go through the process of learning. So what was the reason for doing that learning? Was undertaken for its inherent interest and enjoyment of the activity, or what was the learning about? Versus extrinsically motivated, when we do a specific activity to obtain an outcome that is separable from the learning itself. So we have to keep this in mind. And I remember I want to give an example. Sometimes we get anxious about, let's say we do public speaking, we do a presentation in class. So if we think about everyone will evaluate us, everyone will say either was good or not so good. So then we are thinking about what others would say would be an extrinsically motivated behavior. However, if we think about that presentation, okay, I'm honored to present this in front of these people. I want to communicate the knowledge that I have. And I just want to attach meaning to this, to make a difference with this presentation for a certain group of people, then we are intrinsically motivated. And the learning is more about the task in itself and the meaning attached to it. Okay. So now we have the content of the goals that students value. So what are we trying to achieve, in accomplishing a task? Through accomplishing a task, we want to grow professionally, personally. We want to improve our relationships. We want to do something meaningful for the community. These are all intrinsic goals that are related with our passion, with things that we want to do, we are dedicated to do. So when we look here, intrinsic motivation it's from within, which involves autonomy. We want to master a specific task and we have a great purpose. We have a meaning. While when we think about extrinsic goals, we look, like there are more long-term goals, and it's harder to get more, to feel positive about it, because when we think, okay, so I'm going to the graduate school because I'm hoping in 7 years from now to be wealthy, to be famous, or to have the desired social status, then that's 7 years from now or 5 years from now. So that's harder to motivate yourself in a positive way about a learning experience in a class. So extrinsic goals or extrinsic motivation is from outside, what we can receive from outside while doing learning behavior or whatever behavior we want to, or whatever task we want to do, which is related with compensation. could be reward, right? Because people are evaluating us. Could be like either I'm rewarded with a positive feedback or punishment, that whatever I did was not as good. So it's a punishment from outside, from other people. But we have to remember, I just want to go back to, so this is really important, that extrinsic goals relate negatively to the student's well-being because it's more associated with stress. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves about what others would think about what we're doing, while intrinsic goals relate positively to the student's well-being because it's internal satisfaction. It's okay, I do this because I want to, because I'm passionate about and I'm dedicated to this cause, and that will bring some good, whatever, in what your goals are. So just remember this: you are motivated internally, you have a more positive learning experience, and while motivated externally, you attach more stress to the task. Okay. So there are individual differences in academic motivation. So we are all different, so we have different ways to motivate ourselves. And one of them is perceived ability. Sometimes we think, okay, I am good, smart at reading, but I am not so good or smart at math. So that could be, I mean, a valid evaluation of ourselves, but doesn't mean that if I am not so bright in math, I'm not good at anything else. So it's just, it's still a learning experience. It's better to know something than nothing. And then if the motivation comes from within to learn some math, even if I cannot be the best, it's still associated with positive motivation and with well-being for the student, because it's something that we want to learn, even if we are not the best at. Also, forgetting ability involves our ego, so it's a tendency to evaluate our academic performance by comparison with other people. So, for example, we do that a lot on the test-like situations because we tend to compete with these others. That, for example, if there are students who come and tell me, I did a test, I think I did pretty well, but then when I look at the stats, on the website, I saw that I'm in the pretty low side, with grades. So I'm not so excited anymore because I thought I studied, I did really good, and then I'm in the lower side. So that it's also associated a little bit with the negative motivation because all we could see is our grade. But if we go back and say, well, I learned something by doing this test, I have new knowledge that I can use in the future, then it's associated with less stress and we are more satisfied with the task in itself and with ourselves. We have different beliefs about causes and meanings of success. Some of us may think that success is to outperform one's peers. So as long as I'm better than others, it's great. Other people may think collaboration with other students will help one to succeed. And not only that person, but the other people too in the group, the people who collaborate. The goal is to understand the learning material rather than memorize information. So we have to think about that. The more passion we have and the more dedication and the more motivated we are by the task in itself, we learn more because we are focused on information, and how can we apply that information in the real world, use it, comparing with just learning the material by memorizing information will maybe serve us well on the test, but it's something that we will not remember later, or we will not be able to work with that information for what we need in the future. So it's something to keep in mind, the learning style, what may benefit you most. Okay. And then there are other individual differences in academic motivation. So the meaning of life in school. So students can have different views on these too. So school should help one prepare to do work that would be socially useful. So our goal going to, studying for a bachelor's or master's or whatever we do is to have a job afterwards. So in order to have a job, you need to know how to apply the information that we learn in school, to apply that information in the real world and make it useful to the society. So when we are more task oriented, it means that we are intrinsically motivated, while if we think about school that should help one gain wealth and social status, it's not a task-oriented behavior. This is extrinsic motivation. But this goal is further, because in order for us to get wealthy, to achieve a specific social status that we desire, we have to be able to do the job, to apply the information that we study in school, to do well in the job and make a difference for the, a certain group of people that we work for at the time. And so it's more associated with well-being when we think about, goals that they are more closer to us, more achievable. And then from there, the wealth or social status will come by default when we can apply the information that we have to do our jobs well. So motivations in education, we have also students, we have different philosophies. Is my work socially useful? Is meaningful? Do I self-improve myself by doing this learning experience, or just compete with others? Because when we think about competition with others, if everyone is bad in the class and I'm a little bit better than the rest, I'm still bad. But when I do this to be good, my goal is to be good, I'm motivated by a certain activity, I'm passionate about something and dedicated, then I strive to be good, regardless how are other people in my class. So but the truth is that we as human beings have nothing against which to measure our achievements except the achievements of others. So these are our measurements in especially in learning situations, or school, and competition is always there. It's important how we set our minds up for learning experience and how we can make that less stressful and more productive. I think next slide. And I believe now that, yes, Dr. Browning will take over. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Amena. So, having gone over some foundational literature on motivation, what it is, different kinds of motivation you can experience, ones that are all motivating you to accomplish tasks, but can be more or less associated with well-being. Come back to some of these ideas, but also want to go over some things that motivation is not. When I have students talk with me about motivation, a lot of what they request is that they're saying they lack motivation, they want to become more motivated or get back to being motivated. Um, and well, one thing that to address there, as far as myths about motivation, is that motivation is something you can have or not have. There are different types of motivation that we experience at different times, but we always have a motivation of some kind. Samantha said, all behavior is motivated. We are never lacking motivation. We are never without motivation. We may not be experiencing the particular kind of motivation that we would like to at a particular time, um, but we are always experiencing motivation of some kind. Motivation is not a trait that one increases or decreases or has as a permanent part of their personality and way of being. Uh, Motivation is a state, something that is changing, that is in response to your context or situation. We'll come back to that. So, some different fundamental kinds of motivations that we experience in different ways. We're motivated as humans to establish and maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is a concept from biology, which basically just means that as organisms, we like everything to be kind of calm and even keel and dependable. We don't like to be experiencing too much or too little of any particular thing. We don't like to be under or overstimulated. We like things to just be going fine. Um, and we are motivated as organisms to try to establish and maintain homeostasis in different ways. Uh, to avoid or reduce pain is a universal human motivation. If we are in pain or doing something painful, we're motivated to find a way to not be experiencing that pain any longer. Um, to avoid danger and to seek safety and connection is another universal human motivation. Um, Also to seek pleasure, kind of as the counterpart to avoiding pain. We're motivated to do things that feel good and avoid things that are painful. Um, and we're also typically motivated to repeat behaviors that have been rewarded in the past. So things we've done before that have gotten us something rewarding or positive or beneficial tend to be more motivated to do those things again. I mentioned this before. Another myth of motivation is that it is a character trait, that it is a stable part of who you are that can be increased or decreased. Um, but one big takeaway I'd like you to have from this presentation today is that motivation is a state and not a trait. It is something that changes in response to our situation. The same behavior you can be very motivated to do in one context and very not motivated to do in another one. With the example there, you might be very motivated to sing in the shower if it's something that you find to be enjoyable, but you might be much less motivated to sing at the DMV. Now, that doesn't mean that between taking a shower and going to the DMV that you decreased in the character trait of motivation. What it means is that your motivation changed in some different contexts and situations. Another myth of motivation I see a lot of the time kind of connected to this idea of character trait is motivation as a character trait. Um, it's this implicit idea that I can't get anything done if I'm not feeling motivated. And when people say this, they're often talking about positive motivation, me wanting to do something in order to enjoy it and get it done. And oftentimes, this is kind of a red herring and a convenient excuse to avoid doing things. And we'll come to avoidance behavior and its motivations too. Um, and it leads to this kind of impasse that if you are not currently experiencing the type of motivation you would like to experience, then the way to solve that problem is to try to increase that motivation. Um, we'll talk some more in other slides, but it's entirely possible to complete tasks that you don't enjoy and you have no positive motivation to do. And it can sometimes be a comforting excuse that I have to wait to be motivated. And when I get motivated, that's when I'll get things done. That idea in and of itself, I think, can be deleterious to completing tasks just as much as not experiencing motivation, if not more so. Um, Another thing connected to this idea of motivation is a character trait that sometimes people feel that if they're not motivated to be doing things that they should be doing or somebody feels that they should be doing, then there's something wrong with them. I do not have enough of this character trait of motivation, and therefore I am a deficient person, because that is a good trait that I should have more of. Again, motivation is a state, not a trait. We're always motivated. And if you're not motivated at the time that you want to be, you're responding to something aversive about the task. So if there's something you should be doing or want to be doing, but you're not motivated to do it, you're still motivated. But the motivation is to perform avoidance behavior rather than to complete the task. Um, you're not going to be motivated for every task that you could do or should do or would benefit you or would be valuable. Uh, we are never always motivated to do these things, and that's okay. So I mentioned avoidance behavior before, but avoidance behavior is also a product of motivation. Um, Avoidance behavior, again, looking at the myth of motivation as a character trait, it can be thought of being deficient as that uh, in that motivation trait. But avoidance behavior is motivated just like all other behavior. And a few examples here. So a marathon runner who quits due to dehydration is motivated to restore homeostasis. They did not stop becoming motivated to complete the race, and they also did not lose the character trait of motivation in the course of the race. Um, that avoidance is motivated by a different goal. A gamer who quits a difficult video game is motivated to reduce tension and feelings of inadequacy. They did not lose the motivation to play the game. There was another motivation that happened when their situation and context changed. And a student who avoids studying could potentially be motivated by a lot of things. There could be fear, there could be guilt, there could be feelings of inadequacy, there could just be boredom. or just not liking the subject they need to study. Um, but if you are not studying, you are engaged in avoidance behavior and you are motivated to do so. And procrastination is a highly effective avoidance behavior. Putting it off till later solves a lot of problems in the short term. Um, so, more on to procrastination. Procrastination is a behavior that is motivated by the desire to avoid an unpleasant task. There's something uh, that has been presented to you to do that you are finding aversive in some way. It's painful, it's boring, something else. Procrastination is a behavior that is motivated to avoid that aversive task. A couple ways to think about and define procrastination. Um, be defined as the voluntary, needless delay of an intended act despite expecting negative consequences for this delay. And it's associated with and sometimes motivated by feelings like shame and guilt. And the negative consequences in this definition is about the long-term consequences. Um, that you put off doing an assignment and it still becomes due, and you just have less time to do it later. These are like the negative consequences with respect to specifically putting off an assignment. But the short-term consequences are positive, or else you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't be motivated to do it. In the short term, you get to avoid an unpleasant task. Um, Another way of thinking about procrastination is that it's giving in to feel good in the short term. It's not a lack of motivation or a sign of laziness. And procrastination is not cured by trying to increase positive or intrinsic motivation. Um, Sometimes that can help if that's something that comes to you. But again, I can't get anything done until I'm motivated is sometimes an excuse to continue procrastinating. So we're separating out these two ideas of motivation being necessary to complete tasks. So we can look at motivation and we can also look at task completion. Um, you can be motivated to not complete a task. You can also complete a task that you are not motivated to do. And oftentimes, when you're talking about wanting to be more motivated or wanting to procrastinate less, uh, really the end goal of what you're talking about is task completion. You have something you need to get done, but that you are at least partly motivated to avoid doing. Um, so, ways to complete tasks without uh, falling into the trap of waiting for or trying to increase motivation. Um, the distress tolerance is one way of getting around that. Rather than waiting for positive or intrinsic motivation to occur or finding some way to foment it if it's not coming to you, you can complete tasks by being okay with not liking them or wanting to do them. And I know that's kind of an odd way of thinking and talking about tasks that um, we don't often talk about things like I will do my homework and I don't have to like it. It's just not a way we're used to talking, not a way that we're used to thinking. But its value, you can see it's entirely rational if we separate out motivation and task completion. But even though I'm not motivated for this task, I can still complete it. And I can accept and tolerate the distress or the boredom or the upsetness that it will bring. Um, Also, consciously attending to the long-term negative motivation. Um, Basically, what this means is you can always motivate yourself to do something by the fact that once it's done, it is done. That instead of giving in to feel good in the short term, procrastination can remind yourself of the greater reward of no longer having to do or think about the task. Long term negative motivation. And adjusting self talk and appraisals related to tasks and goals. Um, get into this more in another slide, but part of what can be motivating you to avoid a task is the unpleasant feelings that it might bring up. And remember, one of our fundamental motivations is to decrease or avoid pain or distress. So if something is upsetting, it brings up anxiety, stress, fear. Um, we're typically motivated to avoid that task. And a way we can change that motivation to avoid is paying attention to and creating some change in our emotional reaction to that task in order to make it less aversive. And also on a behavioral level, you can take some steps to try to make the task less aversive and bothersome. by breaking down the task into smaller tasks rather than one big one. Adjusting your self-talk, which we're going to get into in another slide. Checking your expectations for what are you telling yourself about how you're going to get this done and how long you should get it done, things like that. Also reminding yourself of past times you've not procrastinated. A lot of times when you're in the moment of I've got to do something and I'm motivated to avoid it, you get stuck in that moment. And it can be useful to remind yourself of past times when you've just gotten something done, you didn't procrastinate, and that worked out well. But attending to the emotional part of aversiveness of tasks. Modifying your self-talk about a task is a good way to change the aversiveness of the task and therefore change your motivation around it. And a few ways of doing that. So accurately labeling tasks in their impact decreases the aversiveness of them and your ability to tolerate them. So you say are somebody who sits down to do some homework and you tell yourself that you've got to get an A on this particular assignment or else there's no way you're going to do well at all at the rest of the course and you're just going to give up. It's a little exaggerated, but sometimes we talk to ourselves that way. But accurately labeling the task and its impact can make it less aversive. If you tell yourself your entire class grade is resting on one assignment, it's going to make that assignment pretty aversive. But if you accurately label that this is one assignment, I would like to get a good grade on it. If I don't, there will be other assignments that will also give me chances to raise my grade. It's one way of approaching that and accurately labeling it in its impact. Mentioned should a couple of times. Should is a big self-talk word that can induce unpleasant feelings like guilt and shame, um, inadequacy, things like that. So should as a word versus words like could or will doesn't do anything but point out that you are not doing something uh, and it offers you no course of action to get it done. Should says this is a thing you're not doing and you should feel bad about it. Um, it doesn't give you any plan, it doesn't guide you. Words like could and will are action words. I should get my homework done. Points out that you're not doing your homework and invites you to feel badly about yourself. I could or I will get my homework done doesn't have that same emotional weight to it. And it also is giving you a course of action. When we use words like should rather than substitute words like could and will, it changes the emotional valence of the task and can make it more aversive and make you more likely to want to avoid it. Similarly with things like must, need, and have to versus prefer or would like. Um, Again, this is kind of a way we talk to ourselves on a conscious or less conscious level. It's about getting things done and about how we label the importance of them. So, I have to get my homework done perfectly, and I've got to spend hours on it, or else that means I'm a crummy student and I'm going to fail out. I'm never going to amount to anything. Again, a little exaggerated, but sometimes we talk to ourselves this way. We put this pressure on ourselves. And again, talking about a task that way is going to make it more aversive and going to make you more motivated to avoid it. So putting rigid demands on yourself uh, decreases feelings of choice and increases the aversiveness of a task. I have to do this thing because something bad is going to happen if I don't. But if you replace these self-talk words with things like prefer and would like, I would like to get a good grade on this homework and I'm going to try to do that. But if I don't, it doesn't mean I'm an awful student. It just means I'm going to have to try harder, or God forbid, I might get a B instead of an A. But I'll still be okay, even if that bugs me a little bit. So, changing that self-talk again decreases the aversiveness of the task. It's going to make you less likely to be motivated to avoid it. Similar with awful, terrible, the worst, can't stand it, words like this that we put on the perceived costs or consequences of not getting something done, or getting something done, depending on it. So, got this homework to do. It's in my least favorite subject. I've got all these chapters I've got to read. It's awful. I can't stand it. We kind of talk like this about uh, experiences that we have. We go right to the top. Um, say things like, I went to Starbucks and had to wait 10 minutes in line and it was terrible. And we stop and take a minute to examine that. It wasn't really terrible. And most things that we experience on a day to day basis that we call awful or terrible or the worst, uh, it's really not a accurate or a logical way to label things. And again, when we do label things that way, makes them more aversive, makes us more likely to avoid them. So using language that describes tasks worse than they are, makes them more aversive, decreases your appraisal of your ability to tolerate them. We'll get into appraisals. But using words that are more accurate and fair and less emotionally laden, like inconvenient, unpleasant, or suboptimal. Um, this I've got to read 2 chapters for my homework today, and that is unpleasant. That is suboptimal. That is something I would rather not do. These are all things that are accurate and fair to say, and also aren't making the task more aversive than it has to be by saying it's awful or terrible. So I mentioned appraisals, and appraisals is something that we are constantly engaged in, sometimes consciously, sometimes less so. Um, and we engage in appraisal of any kind of task or situation that we're presented with. Um, and we're appraising things on these different levels on a consistent basis. We appraise events or tasks as whether or not they're going to be harmful or threatening, or if they're going to afford us some kind of benefit or give us a positive challenge of some kind. We're evaluating if it's going to have an effect on our self esteem, our values, our life goals, ways that it's going to impact us. We're evaluating if we're going to be able to do it or complete it or cope with it, our perceived ability to do these things. We're evaluating, praising the opportunities for blame and credit that might come from it. If it's something I'm going to be blamed for not doing well versus if it's something I'm going to get credit for, those have different emotional consequences. And we're also appraising the expectations for the future. If we think we're going to be successful at it, if we think something good or something bad is going to come out of it. Appraisals basically are how we process how a task impacts us and how well we can deal with it. And a couple examples to break that down, and these are 2 very opposite ways one might appraise the same task, and it's a little exaggerated, but I do that to make a point. So, 2 different ways you might appraise a homework assignment. I should do this homework, but it will be awful. I'm going to get a bad grade. Then I'll feel like I can't cut it, and I'll fail the class, and I'll have a breakdown, and I'll just be wasting my parents' money. Now, in this appraisal, homework was seen as something that was threatening. There was a negative prediction of outcome, and it was appraised that it was going to be beyond this person's resources to cope with it, that it will likely lead to negative consequences. Um, and all of these aspects of that appraisal, in addition to the self talk I threw in there, like should and it'll be awful, these are all factors that are going to make the emotional weight of this task be more aversive. And therefore, it's going to increase the motivation to engage in avoidance behavior like procrastination and not do it. A different way of appraising the same assignment. I will do this homework even though it's suboptimal and boring. I can probably get an okay grade, and if I do okay, I'll feel like I picked the right major. Just need to get through it, then I can relax after and I'll feel glad I did it and it's over. So, in this appraisal, there's some realism there. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be boring. I could probably get an okay grade. But you're appraising it as having benefit, of it being tolerable and something you can cope with and complete. Um, and you've highlighted the long-term negative motivation of getting it done, and of also being able to manage the level of stress that it'll bring. Um, Additional behavioral things that can be part of the way you appraise tasks. I mentioned this before, but setting reasonable and attainable goals with tasks. So you've got, to write a thesis. If any of you are grad students, takes a while. It's not going to be a reasonable and attainable goal to get your thesis done in a month. So setting reasonable goals of, get this part of my thesis done in a month and this next part in the next month, things like that. Set yourself up by setting unreasonable goals that you feel like you should do or someone else you feels like you should do. Because it's going to make, again, the task more aversive and make you more likely to avoid it. And another part of setting reasonable and attainable goals with tasks is knowing your thresholds. And we all have thresholds for lots of different things, for boredom, for stress, for waiting around, bored, for exercise, whatever. We all have different thresholds for different activities and experiences. And with respect to things like studying, for some people, they can sit down and read and study for 3-4 hours and barely need a break. Some people, they're good for a half hour before they've got to recharge. It'd be important to know and accept your thresholds and to set goals within them. If you're a 30 minutes at a time kind of studier and you tell yourself you absolutely must study for 2 hours right now, or else you're going to fail your class and be a terrible student, well, that's not being fair to yourself with your goal setting. If you're a 30-minute at a time threshold kind of person, you have to work with that. Breaking down tasks into smaller objectives. This is a behavioral approach to making goals less big and less difficult to accomplish at once, and therefore making a bunch of little and somewhat aversive tasks rather than one big and extremely aversive task. Rewarding yourself proportionally but meaningfully for working on tasks. So I choose those words carefully, proportionately and meaningfully. So, going back to our half-hour threshold studying person, you've set some goals for yourself that you're going to take 30 minutes at a time to do some studying, and then you're going to give yourself a break and recharge a little bit. Now, if you reward yourself for honoring that threshold by binge watching 2 hours of Netflix for every 30 minutes of studying you do, it might not be proportionate to the amount of work you're doing, although it might be meaningful for you. So reward yourself proportionately. You do 30 minutes of studying and you need a break. Maybe do 10 to 15 minutes of a break, something like that. It doesn't have to be that exactly, just pulling out numbers. Proportionately, but meaningfully. Find a middle ground in there. And reminding yourself of past successes. And going back to appraisals, one of the things that you're appraising is your ability to cope with something and get it done and be successful at it versus not. And reminding yourself of past successes can be a way of increasing your appraisal of your ability to deal with something and be successful at it. Therefore, make the future task less aversive, make you less likely to avoid it. So, you've got a difficult math assignment. Math isn't your strongest subject, and you're stuck in that moment of, this math is terrible. I'm not going to do well at it. I'm going to flunk out of this class. Taking a moment to take yourself out of the current context where you were having to deal with something that's distressing, reminding yourself of times in the past that, I'm not great at math, but buckled down and done it and gotten through it, and it wasn't fun, but I did fine, and I got my grades and I got out of there. I've done it before and I can do it again, even if it won't be fun. It can be, again, a way of modifying your appraisal of that task, making it less aversive. So, some conclusions of things we've gone over. All behavior is motivated. Anything you're doing, whether it is approaching a task or avoiding the task, whatever your behavior is, it is motivated by something. And we never lack motivation. Motivation is a state in response to our situation. It is not a trait that you are born with or that you can incrementally increase or decrease. Always motivated. There's positive and negative motivation. Positive motivation being one driven by internal satisfaction, negative motivation coming from fear or escape, wanting to do something done to get away from it. Intrinsic motivation is when the task itself is valued or enjoyed. The task itself is the motivation. Extrinsic is when the motivation comes from something externally. We get rewarded for completing it in some way. Procrastination is a behavior, and therefore it is motivated. It is not the absence of motivation. It is not the presence of laziness. Procrastination is the motivation to avoid pain and seek pleasure, to give in the short term in order to avoid an aversive task. Distress tolerance and acceptance are ways you can complete a task without enjoying it and without giving into that trap of, I have to increase my motivation before I can get things done. And your self talk can modify the appraisal of the task, the way you are evaluating the way you can get a task done and what the impact of it will be. Um, and when you change that appraisal to be something more fair, more workable, and more logical, uh, often the impact is that the task becomes less aversive. And therefore, you're less likely to avoid it through things like procrastination. Um, some other applications, takeaways from this today. Um, Identify and foster the motivations you do have to complete a given task. You know, a lot of what I talked about is ways to approach task completion without falling into the I need to increase motivation trap. But there are motivations you can experience for things, and while you don't have to increase them to complete a task, it can be another tool that can be helpful. So you've got a task. Maybe there's a lot of things about it that you don't like. Um, Going back to math, I'm not a big math person. I'm not going to be mostly motivated to avoid a math test if you put it in front of me. But I might sift through and look for, all right, is there anything I do enjoy about this task? And for me, no, I wasn't a big fan of math. I'd always like the feeling of getting a problem done, solving puzzles, so to speak. That can be one little thing I can pull out that, you know what, that feeling of completing an equation, that's something I like doing. It doesn't have to be that exactly, but if there is anything, even if it's just a small thing that you like about doing a task, remind yourself of that. Challenge your myths about motivation, as we talked about. Motivation is a state, not a trait. It's not something you need to complete a task, although tasks we are motivated to complete are more pleasant. You can still get tasks done that aren't very pleasant. And you have a choice in the way you appraise a task to make it less unpleasant and aversive. Remembering that task completion does not require motivation. It's easier when it's there, but it's not necessary. Um, Identify and modify the self-talk contributing to procrastination. We talked about with, you know, shoulds versus could and will, accurately labeling the task and its impact on you. Not calling something the worst when it might just be boring or unpleasant, things like that. Overall, the approach is to be realistic and fair in the way you appraise and talk about tasks. And handle task planning and working realistically, setting goals, breaking down large tasks, knowing your thresholds, things like that. And that is our presentation. Thank you all very much for coming. Anyone have any questions, comments, anything? Welcome, Isaac. Thanks for coming. Anybody else? Questions, thoughts, anything? Okay. Well, thanks once again for listening, everybody. If it was useful to you, take care.
Thank you.